Are you wondering if you can hold real estate directly in a Wyoming limited liability company? I'll tell you what, it's a strategy that's been gaining traction for its asset protection benefits, but it comes with its share of risk and complexities. In this video, I'll unpack the ins and outs of using a Wyoming LLC to hold title to your real estate investments. We'll talk about the legal protections it offers and to the potential pitfalls you'll need to avoid. All right, let's get started. Okay, so Wyoming LLCs, Nevada LLCs, Delaware LLCs, you put your name on it. I hear from investors all the time. Why can't I just hold my real estate in one of these entities? Because they offer all these asset protection benefits. Why should it matter? Well, there are some things you need to look at when you're considering putting your property into a Wyoming or other state LLC. And namely, that comes down to where is a property located? What I'm getting at here is, let's say that I have property that I've purchased, and this property is in Illinois. All right, so I own this Illinois investment. Now, I would like to create a Wyoming LLC to hold title to this Illinois investment because I've been told there are a number of benefits from having a Wyoming LLC set up for me, mainly from, of course, an asset protection standpoint. Now, if you watch my other videos, you know I talk a lot about Wyoming LLCs as being a holding limited liability company. In that case, what it will do is it will hold various LLCs that are set up in certain states to hold your rental property. It's something like this. But rarely do I ever bring up the fact that, rather than setting up these LLCs, why don't you just set up a Wyoming LLC to hold title to this property? Still maybe have a holding company there. Okay, so the reason why you'd want to use the Wyoming LLC, number one, is going to be anonymity. Right? Because in Wyoming, they do not collect, that is, Wyoming does not collect the manager's information or the member's information. So if I have property that's in Illinois and I put it in the name of an LLC, that's a Wyoming LLC, no one will be able to discover the fact that I am the owner by looking at that limited liability company. So that's a main benefit. Second benefit that people talk about, and I talk about it as well, is charging order protections. So if you get sued and somebody gets a judgment against you, then they can't get up here into your Wyoming LLC and go after these assets, or in this case, the asset of the property itself. So you have that benefit. Now, where things start to get a little murky here in using a Wyoming LLC to hold out-of-state real estate comes down to this. If I have property in Illinois and this tenant has become a problem for me and I want to evict the tenant, well, you see, holding rental real estate, owning rental real estate, that is considered to be a business activity. And most states have a statute that states if a business is conducting a business activity in this state, be it Illinois, then that business shall register in this state to conduct that business activity. Okay, so what happens if it doesn't register? Well, here's where an issue can come up. If I have a Wyoming LLC set up to hold Illinois property and I have this problem tenant that I need to evict, and I bring the unlawful detainer action to remove that tenant, well, that tenant could get an attorney to fight it, and they could say, that LLC is not registered to do business here, therefore they quash the action and I can't kick them out. So that's a real legitimate risk you run in using an out-of-state LLC, namely Wyoming, to hold real estate, rental real estate in another state. Now, it can hold raw land, no problem. It can hold vacant property without an issue because you're not engaging in a business activity in either of those two examples. But here we are. Now, what creates a unique situation is where I set up a Wyoming LLC here to own this property in Illinois, but I am not leasing the property out. I have a PM in Illinois that I use, property manager, and that company leases the property to the tenant on my behalf. Now it's a more complicated situation, meaning that if I wanted to evict this tenant, right, because they're not paying their rent or they're just being a problem, my Wyoming LLC is not bringing the action, right? The action is being brought by my property manager, and that property manager is, in fact, registered, hopefully in Illinois, to conduct its business activity there. Therefore, that argument that could be made by the tenant's attorney probably won't come up because they'll realize, hey, this company's the one doing the eviction. This is where the rental agreement ran to. So they wouldn't even think about it. They wouldn't look at how title is held. They'll just look at the lease agreement and say, all right, who are the parties to this lease agreement? So there's where you can kind of skirt the line, right? When you're using an out-of-state property manager, you could probably get around it. And I don't think it would be a problem for you like I showed you in the previous example where they would quash the action here and stop you from moving forward if they had counsel representing them. So this is a situation where possibly it might work. Now, another example where you could do this and even further lessen the risk that you're going to run into problems is if you set up a Wyoming LLC and you then use a land trust and you put your property into the land trust. And then you have the land trust owned by the out-of-state Wyoming Limited Liability Company. So in this case, now you're using an Illinois land trust. Illinois recognizes land trust, but the beneficial owner is an out-of-state LLC. And that'd be no different than, let's assume that you lived in Idaho and you set up an Illinois land trust to own your Illinois property. Well, Illinois is not going to say, hey, you need to move to Illinois, become a resident here in order to be a beneficiary of this land trust. Hence, there's no reason why that Wyoming LLC would need to move to Illinois in order to be a beneficiary of a land trust as well. So if you want to use an out-of-state strategy where you're using, Wyoming limited liability companies to own property in a state other than Wyoming, then I would be careful. I would set it up where you have a property manager there, or better yet, use a land trust and have that flow back to that Wyoming limited liability company. All right, so that's pretty straightforward, but what are the risks, right? If you do this, are there any potential problems? Because I know some of you are probably looking at this going right now thinking, man, it's going to be so much cheaper for me to set up that Wyoming LLC versus Illinois because they charge me a lot of money on an annual basis. Well, the problem is that if you say you're involved in a wrongful death lawsuit and your tenant was killed and it was a result of negligence or just something wrong with the property itself, and they bring a legal action, it's a complicated action, that's where this could probably come up, and a court may not look favorably upon an out-of-state entity owning property either directly, in the first example with the property manager, or possibly even indirectly through a trust and not being registered there. So I see that is one area where it could potentially be a problem for you, but there's always a solution to it. And that solution would be to, if you knew about the problem, you could always register your entity in that state or foreign file it there, get it registered, and then you're legal. Now you're good to go. So we use it both in our own planning here at Anderson. Some people set up Wyoming LLCs with land trusts, have them held back into that Wyoming LLC, as I just described. And a lot of people like to set up the LLC directly in the state where the property is located, because many times they're managing the properties on their own and they understand the risk associated with using the Wyoming LLC and they don't want to deal with that. So make your own choice when it comes to setting up your structures. If you'd like some assistance in doing that, in the show notes, we have a link for a free strategy session. All you got to do is click on it and you'll be put in touch with a calendar where you can schedule yourself with one of our experts here at Anderson to help you get your real estate investing started on the right asset protection and tax planning track. All right, take care.